A maid who is constantly humiliated finds something in her employer's trash that will change her life forever. Elara began another day at work with a heavy heart and hunched shoulders. The Mitchell's house was grand, a symbol of her employer, Mrs. Heloise Mitchell's wealth and status. For Elara, however, this home was not a symbol of comfort, but a battlefield where humiliation became routine. The sun had barely risen when she bent down to clean the living room floors, the tiles shining with a cold shine that seemed to mock her efforts. Mrs. Mitchell watched her critically as she enjoyed her breakfast at the dining table. She always had something to criticize: a poorly washed glass, a fold in the carpet, a piece of dust that escaped Elara's attention. "Again, Elara?" Mrs. Mitchell grumbled. Her eyes narrowed in disapproval. "You really can't do anything right. Look at this mess. It's making me feel sick." That's what happens when you hire a maid of questionable quality. Mrs. Mitchell's sharp words pierced Elara's heart. She had no one to turn to but the echo of her own sadness and frustration. She was a woman of few words, accustomed to swallowing her anger and pain. But every criticism, every look of disdain, left her a little more broken. As she mopped the floor, Elara noticed a small pile of crumpled papers behind the desk. Among the crumpled papers was a lottery ticket. Heloise often throws tickets away, thinking she'll never win, which turns out to be a routine habit. Elara has lost count of how many tickets she's seen thrown in the trash, without even being checked. This was just one more. The yellow ink print was almost faded, but something about it caught her attention. Without knowing exactly why, she felt a surge of hope, a spark in the darkness that surrounded her. Mrs. Mitchell, unaware of Elara's pause, continued her list of tasks for the day, her sharp voice mixing with the sound of the vacuum cleaner that Elara turned on to clean the rest of the house. "After you clean the floor, you need to take care of the garden. Don't make me lose my temper today." As Elara worked, the presence of that note seemed to become a symbol of hope in a sea of despair. She kept it carefully, wondering if that small piece of paper could be the key to a different life, away from the constant humiliation and suffering. The day dragged on slowly, each task a reminder of the position of subservience Elara occupied. But that lottery ticket, thrown away along with a pile of papers and discarded by Mrs. Mitchell, seemed to promise an opportunity for escape. For the first time in a long time, Elara felt a small spark of hope in her weary heart. Elara needed a friendly voice, someone who could offer an outside perspective and help dispel her doubts. With her head still clouded with thoughts, she decided she needed to talk to Sable, her friend and co-worker. Sable was someone Elara could count on in times of need, always ready to listen and offer honest advice. Sable was at the small cafe they frequented, a cozy and quiet place perfect for deep conversations. When Elara walked in, the aroma of fresh coffee and the cozy atmosphere brought her momentary relief. She sat down at the table where Sable was waiting for her, the expression on Sable's face showing concern at how tired Elara looked. "What happened, Elara?" Sable asked, immediately noticing the anguish in her eyes. Elara sighed and began to tell the story of the lottery ticket, from its discovery to her moral doubts. Sable listened attentively, without interrupting, absorbing every word and sensing the tension in her tone. When Elara finished, Sable was silent for a moment, pondering what she had just heard. Then, with an expression of understanding and determination, she spoke. "Look, Elara, I understand how hard this is for you, but think about it. Heloise has never appreciated anything she had. She treats you with contempt, and now a note she discarded is in your hands. You are just taking something that was ignored, something that could change your life." Elara frowned, still struggling with guilt. Sable continued, trying to clarify further. Don't feel guilty. Heloise doesn't appreciate anything she has. She always thinks everything is rightfully hers. What about you? You deserve a chance to change your life, to have something better. It's not fair that your only opportunity comes with guilt. Elara thought about Sable's words. The idea that Heloise never really appreciated the note seemed to make sense. The dismissive treatment she received on a daily basis made her wonder if she was being unfair to herself by hesitating. After a long, silent moment, Sable looked at Elara with an encouraging smile. Sometimes life gives us opportunities that we can't ignore. If you feel you deserve a chance at a better future, then don't dwell on the past. Make the decision that you feel is right, but don't let fear stop you from enjoying what could be a new life for you. Elara felt a sense of relief at hearing Sable's words. The decision was starting to feel less confusing and more clear. She knew she had to make a choice, but she also wanted to make sure that her decision was made with sincerity and purpose. The sun had barely risen above the horizon when Elara arrived in the kitchen to begin her day. But instead of the day starting with its usual tranquility, the atmosphere in the house was charged with tension. Heloise, who was usually difficult, seemed even more irritated and agitated than usual. Her steps were quick and heavy, and her presence seemed to fill the house with an oppressive air. "Elara!" Heloise's voice sounded, sharp as a knife. "What is this here? I asked you to clean this area more carefully." Elara felt a chill down her spine when she heard the tone of disdain in Heloise's voice. She turned to see Heloise with a critical look, her eyes scanning the room as if looking for something to criticize. Heloise wasted no time in pointing out the small mistakes and flaws in Elara's work, exaggerating her criticisms and making it seem as if Elara's work was insufficient, even though it was done with care. "And what is that on your clothes?" Heloise continued, not caring about the answer. "Don't you know that you should dress appropriately for work?" Each word was a blow, and Elara tried to hold herself together, taking deep breaths and swallowing the angry words that wanted to come out. The feeling of being constantly diminished made her feel small and insignificant. The emotional pain was intense, but she tried not to let it show. In the afternoon, the atmosphere in the house became even more tense. Heloise was preparing for a dinner with friends, and the pressure on Elara only increased. The level of demand became unbearable. Heloise was determined to show her guests how impeccable and successful she was, and to do so, she needed someone to vent her frustration on. When the evening came and the guests began to arrive, Elara was already exhausted, but her work was not done yet. Heloise's criticisms continued, and the situation worsened when dinner began. Heloise, in her desire to appear superior, began to make mean comments about Elara in front of her friends. "Look, everyone," Heloise said with a forced smile. "Elara here is doing her best, but as you can see, her clothes and manners are not exactly the most appropriate. She is still learning." The guests looked at Elara with a mixture of discomfort and curiosity, and Elara felt the weight of Heloise's words like a sharp blade. She bore the humiliations with a rigid posture, trying to maintain her dignity in the face of the situation. The urge to scream, to defend herself, was strong, but Elara knew that this would only make the situation worse. Instead, she focused on maintaining her composure, serving the guests and doing what was necessary to ensure that the evening went by without further incident. Every criticism from Heloise, every disapproving look, only reinforced Elara's determination to keep the note a secret. The next day, Elara was in the kitchen, preparing breakfast, when she heard the sound of quick, anxious footsteps. Heloise was coming down the stairs, her face a mask of panic. She looked like a storm about to break out, and Elara felt a tightness in her chest when she saw her mistress's expression of despair. "Where is it? Where is it?" Heloise muttered to herself, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and fear. She was holding a torn piece of paper, with the expression of someone who had lost something valuable. The lottery ticket, which had previously seemed insignificant to her, was now the center of her obsession. Elara, who was cleaning the counter, tried not to pay attention, but the intensity of Heloise's panic was impossible to ignore. Heloise began to rummage through the kitchen, pulling drawers and knocking over utensils in a frenzy. The chaos that followed was almost surreal. Heloise overturned furniture, opened cabinets, and with each passing minute, her desperation seemed to grow. "Did you see a ticket?" Heloise asked Elara abruptly, her voice sharp and demanding. "A lottery ticket. I threw it away, and now I can't find it." Elara, her heart racing, took a deep breath and tried to remain calm. She knew she needed to be convincing, but the feeling of nervousness was palpable. She remembered the ticket in her pocket, the memory of the moment she found it bringing a mixture of guilt and hope. With a monumental effort, she answered, "No, ma'am, I didn't see any ticket." Elara's voice was steady, but her heart was pounding. Heloise looked in disbelief, and her expression of suspicion began to form. She began to watch Elara with a closer eye, watching her movements with an uncomfortable intensity. Elara's every action was now scrutinized with a scrutiny that had never been applied before. Elara's calm demeanor seemed to fuel Heloise's suspicions even more. During the day, the atmosphere in the house was charged with tension. Heloise continued her frantic search for the note, turning every corner of the mansion upside down. Elara tried to focus on her tasks, but the heavy atmosphere and Heloise's constant stares were beginning to undermine her concentration. Doubt and paranoia were taking over the room, creating a feeling of emotional claustrophobia for Elara. Every time Heloise passed by Elara, her eyes seemed to pierce her, looking for signs that Elara knew more than she was saying. Elara felt the pressure growing, the tension was almost unbearable, and the feeling of being constantly watched made her mind drift, struggling to maintain composure. As Heloise continued her search, with each new scream and desperation, Elara felt a mixture of fear and relief. The fear of being discovered and the relief of having precious time to plan the next step. The situation was becoming increasingly tense, and Elara knew she had to stand her ground, because the slightest sign of weakness could expose her. The atmosphere in the mansion was tense, and Heloise's panic was palpable. Elara felt the weight of her mistress's suspicions in every move. The stress was almost unbearable, and with each passing minute, the fear of being discovered grew. The feeling of being in the center of an emotional storm became more and more intense. Heloise, not satisfied, decided to confront Elara once more. Heloise's gaze was cold and calculating, her expression a mix of fury and despair. She entered the kitchen where Elara was. The room seemed to be weighed down by a heavy and threatening aura. "Elara!" Heloise's voice sounded like thunder. "I've already searched the entire house, and I haven't found the ticket. The only person who could have seen something is you. So, I'm going to ask one last time. Do you know where the lottery ticket I threw away is?" Elara felt her heart pound in her chest. The pressure was immense, and the fear of being unmasked was about to come true. She stood firm, breathing deeply to control the nervousness that was almost suffocating her. "No, ma'am, I don't know about any ticket." Elara's voice was calm, but a subtle tremor betrayed her apprehension. She tried to keep her expression neutral, but Heloise's eyes seemed to penetrate every layer of her facade. Heloise's distrust was now turning to anger. Her eyes shone with a mixture of fury and desperation, and her voice became sharper and more threatening. "If you don't tell me the truth, you can prepare to be fired immediately. I don't have time for games, Elara. The ticket is worth millions, and you're going to help me find it, whether you want to or not." Elara felt a chill down her spine. The threat of being fired was real and imminent, and the fear of losing her job, which was her only source of income, was overwhelming. She knew she needed to protect the note at all costs, but she didn't know how she would do so without raising more suspicions. As Heloise continued her frantic search of the mansion, Elara made a quick decision. The note needed to be kept somewhere safe and out of Heloise's reach. With a calculated effort, Elara found a discreet hiding place inside the pantry, among unsuspecting items. She hid the note there, hoping that if Heloise found the note, she wouldn't think it was in such an obvious place. Fear was in Elara's every move. Time was running out, and she needed to act quickly to secure her chance at a better future. Elara began to devise a plan to retrieve the prize without Heloise finding out. The plan needed to be meticulous. Elara knew she had to avoid any suspicious movements and maintain her composure as she planned her exit. Her every move had to be calculated with precision, and she needed to be one step ahead of Heloise. The day had finally arrived. Elara had spent the last few days preparing for her big opportunity and was finally ready to make a move. To ensure that her absence would be accepted without raising suspicion, she began to feign illness. Her performance was convincing, a mixture of a weak cough and a pale appearance that seemed authentic enough to convince Heloise. Her employer, always so focused on her own problems and irritations, did not question it too much and, with a grunt, granted Elara a few days off. The first signs of relief came when Elara heard the mansion door close behind her, indicating that she was finally free, if only for a short time. Anxiety was a constant presence, but the determination she felt was even stronger. With the ticket hidden in a safe place and a plan drawn up, Elara felt a mix of nervousness and hope as she headed to the lottery office. The journey to the lottery office seemed endless. Every red light and every moment of waiting increased the tension Elara felt. She tried to remain calm, but her heart was beating faster with each step toward her destination. The ticket, carefully kept, was more than just a piece of paper. It was the key to her freedom and a new beginning. Upon arriving at the agency, Elara took a deep breath and walked inside, trying to hide her anxiety. The place was quiet, and the clerk at the counter greeted her with a professional smile. Elara, her voice slightly shaky, handed over the winning ticket. The clerk examined the ticket carefully, checking the numbers and comparing them to the record. The minutes dragged by, and Elara's anxiety grew. Each second seemed longer than the last. Finally, the clerk looked up and smiled. The prize was hers. The relief Elara felt at that moment was indescribable. It was as if a huge weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She was holding the key to her freedom, and that was real. The process of claiming the prize was simple, but to Elara, every detail seemed to have a profound meaning. The money was now in her hands, a vision of hope and a promise of a better future. Although the relief was immense, Elara knew that the hardest part was yet to come. She needed to remain cautious and ensure that no mistakes were made that might reveal her plans for Heloise. As she left the agency, Elara looked at the winning ticket and felt a surge of gratitude. The vision of a future free of humiliation and suffering was beginning to take shape in her mind. She knew that she needed to plan her next steps carefully. Change was within her reach, but prudence was essential to ensure that she could finally leave Heloise's oppressive shadow behind. Elara and Sable were back at the bus station, carrying suitcases that felt twice as heavy, not because of their physical weight, but because of the emotional burden of a life left behind. Each step they took toward the bus felt like a step toward an uncertain but promising future. The bus pulled away, and as the city of Woodland Hills receded into the distance, Elara felt a deep sense of relief. The sound of the engines and the rocking of the vehicle seemed to sing a new melody, one that promised a life of new possibilities. Beside her, Sable was equally excited, offering an encouraging smile and words of support. "We're almost there," Sable said, squeezing Elara's hand. "You did everything right. Now it's time to enjoy what you deserve." Elara nodded, but her mind was racing. Thoughts of Heloise and the days of humiliation haunted her. The image of Heloise, with her disdainful gaze and constant criticism, seemed almost surreal now, like a shadow from a nightmare that was finally fading. After a long drive, they arrived in a small, welcoming town, far removed from the glitz and opulence of Woodland Hills. The change of scenery was just what Elara needed. The town seemed to exude calm and simplicity, a welcome contrast to the hustle and bustle of her old life. As they walked through the quiet streets, Elara and Sable felt a sense of renewal. The small town's modest shops and cafes seemed to promise a new life, one that Elara was ready to embrace. With the prize money now safely in a carefully set-up bank account, the plan was in full swing. Elara spent the first few days exploring the new town and finding a place to settle down. She found a small apartment that was perfect for a fresh start. The simplicity of the place was a welcome relief, a space where she could build her new beginning away from the oppression of the past. Meanwhile, Sable helped her plan how best to use the money. They openly discussed investments, business options, and how to secure a secure future. Elara's confidence in having Sable by her side made the process more bearable. Together, they came up with a plan to start a small local business, something that could provide a steady income and give Elara the opportunity to live independently and with dignity. Heloise's heart began to beat faster as days passed, and Elara did not return. The feeling that something was deeply wrong became an overwhelming reality when Heloise entered the laundry area and realized that the small box where Elara kept her personal belongings was empty. Her face turning pale, Heloise began to search the rest of the house for any clue as to Elara's whereabouts. Each room she entered seemed to intensify her frustration and desperation. Where was Elara? With her desperation growing, Heloise called the emergency numbers she knew, hoping to find some information about the missing maid. The answer, however, was only the echo of a frustrating silence. Heloise's frustration and anger were out of control. She found herself screaming into the phone in a futile effort to get answers, her temper rising to levels she rarely allowed. The doors that had once seemed solid and safe now seemed to have closed against her. Elara was gone, and with her, the lottery ticket that Heloise had so dismissively discarded. The frustration was not limited to the loss of the ticket, but extended to the fact that Elara, the employee she had always considered a subordinate, had managed to escape without a trace. Heloise was forced to confront something she had never wanted to admit. Her treatment of Elara, the way she had belittled and humiliated her, had finally had an effect. She looked at the elegant furniture and valuables around her, realizing that it had all been achieved in part by her contempt for people like Elara. For the first time, Heloise reflected on her actions with true perspective. The sight of a house that had once seemed a symbol of her status now seemed like a stage for her own failures. What had once been a source of pride and control now became a grim reminder of a wasted chance. In a rare moment of vulnerability, Heloise saw the harsh truth. Her arrogance and cruelty had a cost, and now that cost was right in front of her. What would you have done in Elara's place? Would you have kept the ticket and claimed the prize, or would you have returned the ticket to Heloise? Here's another moving story.